If I were really going to say one thing that this channel is about, it's making sense of our tiny lives. The thing is that even if people are massively outsized in comparison with other human beings, they're still very small on the epic global scale and on the cosmic scale. But most of us don't even have that problem. We don't have 1 million followers. We don't have hundreds of thousands of people looking at us. Maybe we've got, the normal number. Out here, that's 150. And then we do social media and we wind up with, conversations with strangers. And that's kind of interesting. But most of our lives are really small. And they're just not going to have massive, visible, measurable, observable impacts in the world. Now I've got butterflies on all of my logos and all of my materials, and it is because of the butterfly effect. And people are like, oh, I've heard it misidentified, where they're like, little effects add up, and it's no, that's about complexity. There is a paper in which he mathematically shows that because of rapid divergence, it's called high sensitivity to initial conditions, the flapping of a butterfly can create unpredictable impacts that will echo through the entire system and result in a typhoon. But then you don't know which butterfly caused what. And in fact, it didn't exactly cause it. It was just a perturbation. That's a very small change. A perturbation in the initial conditions that caused the entire system to change how it progresses. And all of us are perturbations in the system. We're wandering through the world not knowing what happened, what the impact was, and making sense of that, making sense of our limited awareness of how big things are, how big we are, what the impacts are. Understanding the systems we're embedded in is the work that I've been doing for the last 30 years. So I get these books out of the library to try and make sense of this tiny life. And the books are always, of course, written by people who managed to get books published. So their tiny life is not as tiny as most of our tiny lives. And then I see like CEOs and people who started foundations talking about the importance of the everyday people. And I'm like, but you're not one of us. And there we find the problem, because once you stop being in that tiny, tiny life and you start having outsized influence, your contributions to helping other people make sense of their tiny, tiny lives become suspect. And this is a weird medium to be doing this in, because if you're in any way successful, you're no longer just having 10 or 15 or 20 people look at your videos. You start to have, I occasionally have a video on LinkedIn that gets thousands of views, but I still have a tiny, tiny life, because even with thousands of views and people never coming back, it's sort of like, oh yay, I got my 15 seconds of fame. It's not even minutes on any of the social media any longer, it's seconds. But I think that ultimately what we wind up with is that we have to make sense of this collectively. We have to make sense of it in concert, in conversation. We have to keep talking to one another and go, okay, but how do we be okay in a culture that lauds success and lauds the outlier, but punishes us for having tried and failed? And if you've got a gap on your resume where you tried to start a business, I've seen people say, if someone who tried to start a business and is looking for a job, it's because they failed and they're unworthy, basically. And so we've got this extreme survivorship bias about how you go about making more of yourself, making sense of things. And I don't think there's a good answer for that besides keep chatting with other people, keep talking to one another, keep having hard conversations about the existential questions all the time. So it's making an examined life, knowing that your examined life is really only going to impact sort of the 5 people closest to you most. One of the things I saw in my travels through the world was John Keats's grave. And he died very young, and hadn't had the success that he was hoping for. And he died in despair, and he said, "Don't even put my name on my gravestone." So on his gravestone it says, "Here lies one whose name was writ in water." And then after he died, his poetry became well known and read. And one of his friends said, "This is appalling." And so when his friend died, decades later, he said, "Have me buried next to John Keats and put his name on my gravestone so that everybody knows who's there." And that's sort of we don't even know what our impact is in the world. Van Gogh died having sold 1 painting, maybe, and now he's the most expensive painter. All of the paint, I think Sunflowers was the one that had been most expensive. I don't know what's gone on since then, but we don't know. And I'm not saying any of us are going to be Keats or Van Gogh, but I am saying that just because we haven't made sense of our tiny lives doesn't even mean we're having a tiny life. It means we're experiencing a tiny life, but it doesn't mean that we're genuinely always going to be tiny. And the converse of this is the poem Ozymandias, or Ozymandias, I don't know how to pronounce it. Ozymandias is about a statue in the desert. It's a statue of a great emperor who had conquered everything. And he says on his own dais, "Look on my works, ye mighty, in despair." But the statue has fallen and is covered by sand, and no one knows who he is. Nothing remains beside. And our grandest, most extravagant accomplishments in the world are still temporary. There's going to be a time when all of this urban center, all the technological accomplishments of our 150 years are going to be a smear in the geological record, the same as the KT boundary. And so as we're making sense of things, holding on to that epic sense of how small we really are, I think can be a tremendous, I don't want to say therapy, but for existential dread, coming to terms with that and being like genuinely grounded in that reality, I think is profoundly healthy. And one last contribution. One of my very favorite cartoons is by, I'll put her name in the, Jenny. She draws a lot of mice. But it's a sea of penguins, and I think they're all emperor penguins, and one in the middle looks around and sees himself in the sea of penguins and says, "Oh my God, I probably don't matter." And the truth is, like, that's just true. And so what we do with that is fundamentally the challenge of our lives. How do we come to terms with, I just don't matter all that much? So do we become despairing, or is it liberating? Because those are both valid answers to, oh, I don't have as much power and control as I think I do. And how do we therefore go, okay, in pursuit not of fame or fortune or success or power, but recognizing that what makes human beings happy is genuine connection and contribution. How do we use this to be a point of liberation instead of a point of oppression? So if you're up for it, I want to give you an assignment. and it is to do the thing that triggered this video in the first place. I went to a library I'd never been before, and I was in the stacks, and I was in a section of the stacks that I have not read anything from. And I've had this experience almost every time I go to a library with a sense of sort of open awareness, is how little I have ever read and how little I'm ever going to. How few videos and books I have time to read or watch, and how much is going to always remain a mystery for me. So if you're willing to take a challenge, I would assign you the Library of Awe challenge, which is to go to a largish library. It doesn't actually have to be that big of a library. Go to a largish library though, and pick a section you've never stood in, and look at the titles on the shelf. You don't even have to pull anything off the shelf. Just ponder that somebody spent hundreds or thousands of hours to put the content into that book. And then how many thousands of books are in front of you? The millions of hours of human endeavor that are captured just in the text of this library. And that's a highlight of what they had come to over the course of a lifetime. And I find that a practice that just completely leaves me in awe every time I do it. That scale of human endeavors and my smallness in the face of that, and really, really coming to, I guess, forgive myself for forgive myself for being human, forgive myself for being small, forgive myself for not knowing the things I don't know, because I can't. There's no way to know all of those things, or even a tiny, tiny fraction of all of those things. Although that last thing I said about the tiny fraction of all the things reminds me of that challenge to see the universe in a grain of sand and eternity in an hour. That has also had this moment of one moment genuinely and deeply appreciated is the payoff for being here. That the moments of delight, the moments of joy, the moments of awe, the moments of seeing ourselves in that flow of all things give us the ultimate experience of being here and being human. And so that ability to look at an insect and have the moment of awe that in the same way that everything in the universe led to you being here, everything in the universe led to that bug being there too. And we're all just this like point in time, where the droplet in the ocean arising and collapsing and returning to the endless flow of things. And there's so much grace and beauty in that. And then there's the last thing, which is wrestling with the ego, because I really, really want a lot of you to see this video and watch it and like it. And that's funny.